The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Taneti Maamau, President, Head of Government, and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigration of the Republic of Kiribati. I request. Oh, he's not here yet. Is he here? I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Taneti Maamau, President, Head of Government, and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigration of the Republic of Kiribati. And I invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Secretary Antonio Guterres, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I bring warm greetings from the government and the people of the Republic of Kiribati, on whose behalf I am very proud and honored to address you all today. In His wonderful holy name, President, I join previous speakers in congratulating you on your election to the presidency of the 74th session of the United Nations. And I wish you every success as you guide our deliberations over the next few days and for the remaining 12 months. On this note, I wish to assure you of Kiribati's support, both morally and in kind, on any initiative that seeks to make the planet Earth a cleaner, greener, and safer home. This is at the core of Kiribati's 20-year vision in our efforts to transform our nation to a better Kiribati home and to implement the globally agreed 2030 agenda. We appreciate the Secretary General's recent visit to the Pacific, but would like to highlight the need for a more balanced presence of the multi-country office for the islands in the Northern Pacific. At this point, I would like to pause to express my deepest condolences to our brothers and sisters from the Bahamas for the loss of many lives and the huge damage to homes caused recently by Hurricane Dorian. The theme of this year's summit, galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate change, and inclusion, reminds us that for our national development action to be effective, we need a stronger political global alignment amongst multilateral support and assistance delivered to those who matter the most and according to their needs and priorities. Mr. President, poverty and inequality remains humanity's biggest dilemma and challenge. The social and economic security of any nation can only be strengthened if the support system addresses the needs and empowers people from home. It is therefore critical that the UN program target the family at the household level, from where the fragmentation of values draws a fault line in our societies. Apparently, the Kiribati government has made a substantial investment in subsidizing copra, targeting households and coconut farmers. In our narrow economy, the goal is to benefit those who are not in poverty, but those who have been deprived of the opportunity to improve their social and economic status. This is driven by our strong desire to uplift the economies and lives of the 49% of our people on the outer islands, who for years have long been deprived from their share of development. The government invested 32 million Australian dollars in 2017 and 31 million Australian dollars in 2018 into this copra industry. To ensure sustainability, we are assessing the policy impact as well as farmers' voluntary contribution to superannuation for retirement savings, supported by financial literacy. Strengthening inclusion of marginalized and often forgotten sections of the community is core to our egalitarian culture. With a 4 million Australian dollar senior citizens and special needs subsidy program this year, 2019. This underlines our values to recognize the importance of our elders in our traditional cultural system, and we are very proud that we have taken the steps to duly recognize their importance legally. To further demonstrate the commitment of leaving no one behind, the investment in outer island infrastructure, including wharves, jetties, roads, and airstrips, is now also underway. The government has already provided 60 million Australian dollars, 30 million in 2017, and another earmarked 30 million in 2020. We also thank the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank for their additional financing of 40 million Australian dollars for outer island maritime infrastructure. This investment project addresses our isolation challenge by enabling trade and mobility of people, goods and services, and strengthening delivery of public services while reducing the cost of accessibility. Something more fundamental to Kiribati's island atolls is our basic right to water. Fully leveraging our partnerships, the 58 million Australian dollar South Tarawa Water Supply and Sanitation Project will be co-funded by the Global Climate Fund, GCF, the World Bank, ADB, and my government contributed 12% of this project, consisting of cash contributions and in-kind provision. Certainly, we can't wait. The damage of climate change is a daily experience to our lives. This life-changing project will provide the 24-hour clean water supply for all South Tarawa, that is the capital, residents for the first time in history by harnessing our ocean to provide clean drinking water. We also acknowledge the Government of New Zealand's support for contributing 0.7 million Australian dollars for the sanitation components, which will transform the hygiene and sanitation standards at household and community levels for our people. These bold infrastructural projects highlight our ownership of our own developmental challenges. To co-invest our own funds due to the sporadic nature of our atolls, which exacerbates infrastructure costing due to the high logistical cost, risk, and challenges. These critical investments will be game changers for Kiribati's development curve. We acknowledge the support of our development partners, and equally important is the lessons learned drawn from our partnership and the need to respect matters relating to the nation's rights to do what it sees that serves its best national interest. Mr. President, education is the backbone of a nation to inspire the future of its citizens. We have embraced this through our investment into the education sector, having the third largest share of 23% of the 2019 fiscal recurrent budget of 28 million Australian dollars, which is equivalent to 11% of our gross domestic product. In addition to this, we acknowledge the Australian government's support on the Kiribati Education Improvement Program and other donors throughout the education value chain, with a development budget allocation equivalent to 28% of our GDP, making education the third largest sector of development intervention behind infrastructure and corporate. We also introduced our new free education policy in 2016, ceasing the national quota system and allowing for the first time all Kiribati students reaching a pass grade to pursue their full studies with government support. Ladies and gentlemen, with a fragile population of 110,000, almost half of whom are the youths, I am convicted that this investment will yield a population dividend that will lift our nation up. Removing constraints such as providing transport to schools for students has also improved school attendance rates. My government is expanding its vocational technical training in the rural areas around the country. It is our aspiration to drive inclusive education by improving access to education and ensuring quality education for all. We have also invested 1 million Australian dollars in our preschool level education for teachers who have the important responsibility to nurture and educate our young ones. This new early childhood education initiative is a key catalyst for intergenerational transformation towards sustainable development. Of great importance to Kiribati and our Blue Pacific is without question the alarming dilemma of our present time, and that is climate change. The science validated through IPCC 1.5 special reports was already evident to us before these reports were even released. We have already secured green climate funding for one project and now strengthening access to climate finance, which we have earmarked through our climate change policy and our integrated Kiribati Joint Implementation Plan. This will drive the achievements of sustainable development goals to secure the future of our youths and generations to come. The current negotiations on the draft agreement on the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity and boundaries beyond national jurisdictions are of key importance to Kiribati and the Pacific. We urge that any outcome of this negotiation should not in any way jeopardize the health and the wealth of the long stretch of oceans defining the Blue Pacific, upon which our livelihood depends. Our maritime boundaries are critical to the Pacific region, mapping jurisdictions over our waters, continental shelf, exclusive economic zones, and resources. The recent IPCC report is clear that the rising sea has the potential to profoundly shift the baselines, thus altering legal entitlements regarding the spatial extent of our delineated boundaries endorsed by the UN. The IPCC reports serve as a catalyst for informed, urgent decisions by governments and now multilateral policies for actions to ramp up our commitments for implementation. The same boundaries should also apply to our upper airspace, with the states to have a role in the management of their airspace consistent with the International Civil Aviation Organization policies. This is critical for securing Kiribati and the Blue Pacific future in this world. From a smaller island perspective, over-engineering of the development of small island states is a risk. Aligned to the theme of galvanizing multilateral support, I amply implore this Assembly to consider the complex web of bi- and multilateral support pouring into small, fragile countries like ours without the capacity to coordinate all of your supports more effectively. Kiribati will start to take control of this situation as it is starting to stretch our already scarce government resources, risking diluting the impact of development. 40 years after becoming a sovereign nation, these consolidation and maturity processes will see a critical pivot for our small nation, where we aspire to reflect the perfect harmony of our Kiribati dance in the way we administer and align the coordination of our agile development process. I note the term Highland paradox, describing the precarious situation of Kiribati's graduation as a least developed country due to its permanent state of fragility and vulnerability while maintaining a relatively high gross-national income per capita. Mr. President, the paradox is what we live in every day. With the blue ocean we have now coined as our regional approach to climate consciousness, being at the very core of who we are in Kiribati. In truth, we are essentially being categorized as an anomaly in the system of classification of nations. Perhaps the members of the Economic and Social Council and the UN scientists should visit, see, and experience the Highland paradox of Kiribati, and I challenge you to come along to the islands, and particularly to hear the voice of our youth calling, "We are not thinking, we are fighting." As they join the voice of millions of children around the world last Friday in their climate change strike. Amazing how these young children can muster their efforts to address the world leaders and even come, and I acknowledge the presence of that young brave girl from Sweden, Greta Thunberg. And I join and echo the voice of our youth, and I raise the challenge, particularly to those who have excessive ability to do so, to act right now, to act right and to act now, and be seen by the young watchful eyes as a good neighbor, and there are one home where we all live. Furthermore, the current turbulences that we continue to face today in our world emerged because of our continuous greed and hunger for power and dominance. We have had our own taste at a national level with legacies of World War II, the Battle of Tarawa, phosphate extraction on the island of Panama, and the nuclear testing legacies in the eastern part of our country on Christmas Island. The consequences continue to thrive to this day with health implications for our people. Destruction of our land that continue to deprive our people of their rights to live freely, and many still living with unclosed chapters. These are some of the unaccountable practices and breaches of human rights warranting compensation from those responsible. And as a champion of anti-corruption, Kiribati will continue to pursue fair settlements and compensation for our people who have suffered and continue to suffer the consequences of these unjust practices. Mr. President, we believe that the real and true test of the success of the UN is not to be measured in the number of treaties concluded or resolutions adopted, but rather on how the most vulnerable, inflicted, and disadvantaged people on the ground feel better off as a result. That is the reason why we gather here each year. Our theme, galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate change, and inclusion, calls for a true reform of our multilateral system. Mr. President, in the development business, a business exists because of its customers. In the same manner, we, the countries, are your customers, and therefore, any reform in the multilateral system must consolidate the various multilateral interventions into a coherent country-centric program. I conclude by sharing with us all our traditional blessings of the Maori, the Rai, the Tabamoa, meaning peace, health, and prosperity upon us all. Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President, Head of Government, and Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigration of the Republic of Kiribati. For the statement just made, may I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the Head of State.
Thank you, Mayor.